Professor Barnham, would you be able to take us through the presentation that you prepared, please?
Thanks very much for that intro, Neil. That's great. Okay, I'll share screen. Well, good evening. I'm going to present the evidence from the Natural Resources Wales recent consultation that Westminster Environmental Agency is covering up the existence of plutonium microparticles in the mud. This is the mud, as you've heard, dumped off Cardiff Bay in 2018. So there are 6 items of evidence I'm going to discuss. I want you to look for the clues that prove that the advice recently given since the end of the consultation is bad science. So, first of all, why the cover-up? In the Magnox reactors, like Hinkley Point A, civil electricity generating reactors, were designed so that their irradiated fuel could be removed without stopping the reactor running. That meant in the early years, the irradiated fuel that came out would contain weapons-grade plutonium, and indeed, we now know that it was intended that up until 1970, when interestingly the Non-Proliferation Treaty started and forbid such things happening, it was intended for the MOD. So the amount of fuel that was taken out in that period was a state secret. In 1985, a team that I led found 2 sources on the public record that showed us how much fuel had been discharged by Hinkley Point A in the 1970s. And what it showed was that in 1968, over twice as much spent fuel was removed from HPA as was safe, as the design of the system, of this new novel system, would allow. So even at that time, we thought this was a crazy way to run a reactor. I bet that new system produced accidents. Our calculations were verified by the MOD, of all people, in 2000, when they gave an inventory of their weapons-grade plutonium and had to admit that more than 1/3 of a ton of weapons-grade plutonium, they didn't know where it came from. We knew more than that. The 1985 calculation we'd published was just about the same amount of weapons-grade plutonium was produced by all the civil Magnoxes, the majority in Hinkley Point A. Then in 2018, when the dumping was first made, there were no alpha tests made, necessary tests to show plutonium, despite the fact that we'd publicized that Magnox Limited had admitted there had been accidents in those early years that had led to irradiated fuel dropping to the bottom of the cooling ponds. And under freedom of information conditions, they got for us a report, which you're going to hear a lot of, NRPB M173, which clearly shows plutonium leaks from the ponds. Now, the March quantum consultation that NRW organized, we obviously put all this information to them. They passed it on to Environmental Agency, and their advice to NRW was to essentially follow the party line. Don't mention the plutonium. EA claim an incident in the 1960s released fission products into the pond. Now, nuclear physics says that for every fission atom released into the pond, there would have been around 1 plutonium atom. So that's the first cover-up of plutonium. But let's look at the gamma emitters, the fission products, are this dotted broken line here. What this records is the amount of gamma emitters in liquid waste in the pipeline between the cooling ponds and the mud in the Severn Estuary. The dashed line is reducing in just the way you'd expect. Now, this is the data up to here, which we got from, you can get from Westminster. Westminster will admit to that. These were gammas. And the level there of the gamma radiation was the level which was the maximum allowed in any 1 year. What interested us about the Westminster record is that there was nothing for Hinkley Point A that for earlier years. We assumed that meant that it probably went up even higher above what they were allowed to do, and that's why they'd suppressed it. And therefore, we asked for details of the gamma emissions there. They sent us that data from the NRPB report, just that data for those years, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. And it was extremely low, not high. But what that shows is that something very special happened. Massive release of gamma radiation in 1969. So that's another cover-up at Westminster. Now, the third very important point about this peak, it's clearly so big that just the normal radioactive decay you expect as time passes describes this fallout here. There's no signs of loss of the source of those gamma rays. There must be an awful lot of fission products in that pond. Otherwise, this would have run out earlier. It's not just an incident. There's no way. That is a cover-up. Remember, this is what they told NRW to reply. Now let's look at the red line, the really interesting thing. This is what, as you will see, what inadvertently turned up in this report. It was alpha measurements of plutonium. So the red line here is what this Westminster report says how much plutonium there is in the waste discharge from Hinkley Point A cooling ponds to the mud. And okay, it's all over the place, but in fact what it is doing on average, it is pretty constant, which it should be, because plutonium lives for tens of thousands of years. And so that's again consistent with the fact that there's an awful lot of it. And notice in here how well it agrees with the fission products. I put the peak at one to one because that's what nuclear physics says, but the shape really indicating that something very untoward was happening in 1969. And 1982, there is a peak here which is bigger than the original incident, the only thing that the Environment Agency will admit to. This is much more than double the size. That's an awful lot of plutonium. So again, there's clearly no signs of it running away. And most important, to do our calculation of how much plutonium has got from the cooling ponds out to the mud, we've assumed it's constant. Now, if there were more of these incidents, and we have reasons for thinking there may have been, then there could be a lot more. If the leak had remained constant to 2014, microparticles of about 1 micron diameter, that's 30 million of them. Magnox has said that the filters between the cooling ponds and the waste pipe out to the mud, those will only allow particles of size up to 5 microns to escape the filters. So what we know from this Westminster report is that all the plutonium leak consists of particles of size less than 5 microns. That is extremely important and extremely dangerous, because at Sellafield, where they send lots of plutonium out into the RSC, 1 to 2 size micron plutonium particles have been observed to be blown back in sea spray onto the shore. And here's the real crunch. Plutonium particles of that size are small enough to be inhaled. Once inside your lungs, they can cause serious health problems, for example, cancer. The final point on the cover-up is that you can't get this report on the Westminster NRPB website. So Magnox will have said that we've got these the awkward squad onto us at the moment. So the gatekeeper says, as all gatekeepers would, well, why do they want it? They think that there's in those 2 years they were emitting above the limit, and gatekeeper will go back and say, well, were they? And Magnox say, no, it's actually if you add up all those gammas, it's actually very small. So I imagine the gatekeeper saying, "Oh well, that's all right then. Let them have it." And without looking, now while I've been talking, nattering away, and hypothesizing, anybody seen what's of interest there? What they've missed? The gatekeepers have missed that line at the bottom. 239 plutonium, alpha emitter. All those gammas and an alpha there. They've missed that. As soon as we saw it, we asked for all the data in all the report, and quickly before they realised what they've done. And this, in recent correspondence to members of Geiger Bay, there have been these two statements. Can you see the evidence? Can you think of the evidence why these are wrong? Hot particles have, according to the best of our technical advisors' knowledge, that is the Environmental Agency, hot particles have never been identified around the Hinkley area. Second one, if there was an abundance of these microparticles, then a gamma emitter would identify a spike in the results and will be further investigated. So, just where are they going wrong? Where is that incorrect science? You've seen it all. Here it is. It's the NRPB M173 has got exactly that information in it. Here is the plot I showed you earlier. The red data, the plutonium data, says there's more than 300 grams in waste from HPA, and in the mud around the Hinkley site, all of particles less than 5 micron size. So there is evidence that there are hot particles in the Hinkley area. And the really interesting one, I think, is the second one. Back to this massive spike. Did any of you notice there was absolutely no change? It just carried on. The gammas declined just as we expected. There are plutonium nanoparticles in the waste, but no gamma spike. We sent a load of questions to NRW to ask Environment Agency about this, and we're also looking at taking legal opinion on this waste, because it is, I think it's an extremely serious matter that Westminster is telling incorrect science about a situation of great importance to the health and safety of people, residents of South Wales.
Thanks a lot, Professor Barnham. I think the evidence there that you have provided is clear. It completely contradicts Natural Resources Wales. They've said constantly all the way along that a spike in gamma particles, gamma radiation, would identify plutonium, and then they would have to do the testing for plutonium. And the evidence that you've just provided shows that in 1982 there was a huge spike of plutonium and no gamma spike whatsoever. So that completely contradicts all the answers that we've been given over the last 3 years. I'll just read some of the comments. And first of all, people are getting confused. They're talking about the Welsh Assembly, we call it the Welsh Parliament now, being responsible for this. It isn't. It's Natural Resources Wales, which is an agent of the Labour government in Wales. It's the Welsh government, not the Assembly. Iestyn says that the waters of Cardiff may never be safe due to the extremely long life of radioactive waste. KD Tom says that Professor Barnham's involvement and assessment will definitely make our leaders take notice and stop the dangerous disturbance and dumping of radioactive mud off Penarth. Iestyn commented, it's terrifying. Ken says this is an absolute scandal. Shame on the Labour government. Denver asks what would be the cost. There's a question there. What would be the cost of the testing? Could you put a cost on the required testing, Professor Barnham? Sorry.
I'm afraid it's not my area. I really don't think it's. I don't think it's a cost. I don't think it's a cost problem. That's not why they're doing it. They're not doing it because they know very well what the results will be. The one thing that backs that up is that they're suggesting now that there should be restricted, extremely restricted tests to look for alphas rather than the thorough tests that are necessary.
What Tim said to me previously, if you wanted whistle and bells testing, a huge amount, the most sophisticated, it would cost in the region of 100,000. John comments that we have COVID-19 and we're in a very fragile position, but this is scandalous. Roy says that the evidence speaks for itself. Yestin asks, why do you think Natural Resources Wales and the Welsh Government are not drawing our attention to this? They're ignoring it, Yestin. They've been ignoring it for the last 3 years. And I'm going to appeal here to every other politician in Wales to look at this research, look at the data, and support the campaign. The Geiger Bay campaign is a non-party political campaign. We simply want to protect our environment.
Can I come in on that one, Neil? I think it's a very interesting question, and obviously you know more about the politics than I do. I think one of the factors with the Labour majority is that crazily it is still Labour Party policy to support nuclear, even though it's become essentially redundant. Labour hasn't caught up with that, and Labour, I think, is keen on when Wilbur, the nuclear reactor in the when that finishes, they would like it to be they can see more jobs in the government's plans to replace it by a next generation reactor. And but the crazy thing about that is I don't think that'll ever be built. And the jobs anyway are going to go to the Chinese and the Japanese. And the Japanese have just pulled out anyway because they don't see any future for nuclear. So I think some of them, I'm guessing it was party policy to say, if we oppose this dump, then we will send the wrong signals to investors in Wilbur.
Wilbur is, just to explain, is the nuclear power station up in Ynysmore in Anglesey, which is not. It's not. There is one there already, but there was going to be another one, and that's not going ahead now. Richard asks, where do we go from here? Well, I would ask everyone to support the Geiger Bay campaign. Bethan asks, what is the Future Generations Commissioner doing in all of this? The answer to me is nothing. We have to get on the case. Michael talks about the discussions that they're having in secret, and he says that's evidence enough. And what I find absolutely outrageous is that we have very erudite, people with such expertise like Professor Barnham in this field, and they have been excluded from the so-called expert committee, chaired by a former Labour politician with no expertise whatsoever in nuclear energy. They had one meeting recently, and I was not allowed to attend. I tried to get in on the meeting, and the meetings are held in secret, as Michael said. John says the people of Wales deserve better. Rachel says that as well. Bethan says that it's a major national scandal. I agree. Dawn says, how can the Welsh Government possibly allow this? Talking about the future out for our children. Denver raises an excellent point of detail here, Denver Davis, that the filters filter out materials bigger than 5 microns. And as Professor Barnham outlined there is already evidence existing of plutonium microparticles of less than 5 microns. So that the dangerous plutonium particles that the professor was talking about earlier will not be stopped by the filters. Megan,
very good point to emphasise. Yes, you're right, Neil. They're all less than 5 microns diameter, the dangerous size, all of them.
Okay, here's one for you, Professor. Megan Sanger says, is your scientific research supported by other peers? What is the relationship between scientists and the nuclear industry?
It depends on the scientist. I certainly don't get any support from the nuclear industry. No, I'm actually retired, so I can claim that I'm not getting financial support from anybody. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there are some people who get their support from the nuclear industry, and so some academics, and therefore one has to be careful about what they're saying.
How can any scientist keep a straight face and say that there was because what everyone needs to remember, I think this is the problem that we face. there was no testing for plutonium in 2018.
Yes.
They've already dumped 80,000 tonnes of this waste in Welsh waters. They want to come back and dump a further 780,000 tonnes, and that's what we have to stop. But I'm not sure, how can anyone keep a straight face, Professor, when they say that there was no need for alpha testing in 2018 because there wasn't a spike in gamma, and we've just seen the graph you've provided there.
I think we come back to Basel 40. I mean, has been Westminster policy. Don't mention the plutonium. As I say, reading the whole NRW consultation response, they just didn't address the evidence. They just ignored it. Like I was saying, it's out of scope, and it should be passed on to a Welsh radiation protection board, which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of length that they'll go to. They're just not prepared to address the plutonium issue. It's ever since the 1960s. It's been top secret. It's still top secret.
One thing I want to raise with Megan and others as well. This is an actual report. It was report NRPB M173. So this. Do you want to explain the origin of the graph, Professor?
A Westminster report.
Yeah,
report that they will not admit to existing.
Yeah. So, just to be clear there, so this isn't your research. It's a Westminster report, NRP M173. Yes. Westminster has told us that this plutonium exists in their report, and if you look, actually, they stopped testing in 1986.
Yeah, that's right. We found a different version of this that they sent to the EU, in which it said 85 or 86. In that report, it was 84. Yeah, that's one of our questions. One of our questions. When did they stop testing, or did they stop reporting it then? And why did they do so?
Yeah, but I think it's really important that then this isn't your research. It's not an individual's research. No. It's an official report. It's an official report.
Yeah. Their own report, which they will not even address in the consultation.
Yeah. Yestin asks a political question: why the opposition parties aren't outraged by this? Well, we are. Yestin, the Welsh National Party. Hopefully, the others will be now. Leon asks an excellent question: where is the local and national press on this? Where's the Welsh press? Well, we'll try and hit them tomorrow to make sure they cover this scandal. Bethan asks who's on the so-called expert committee. It should be online, Bethan. Nobody of note, really, in my opinion. Stephen says this is an absolute scandal and tip of the iceberg. Alved wants to know why the committee meet behind closed doors. What have they got to hide? Rachel says, how can we stop this? She's already signed a petition and shared it to as many places as she can. Rachel, get in touch with me. And anyone that wants to do anything about this, please get in touch with me. And also, all you got to do is look for the Geiger Bay campaign. I'll give you the contact details. David says the facts speak for themselves, because what we've had, Professor, on this is we've had the usual basic smears that you get with scaremongering. You don't know what you're talking about. I'll be polite. Some people have been saying that, which is why it was important for me to read out your CV at the beginning. And I'd just like to say to everybody watching and listening to this, Professor Barnham is one of the most eminent academics in the UK on this matter, on this topic. And I'm getting sick and tired of, for example, drain engineers telling me that people like Professor Barnham don't know what they're talking about.
Well, one thing that's very nice of you to say that, Neil. Can I just point out, as I said on slide 2, my team that wrote the 85 paper knows more about the weapons grade plutonium that the MOD has than the MOD itself. So saying we don't know anything about this, about weapons grade plutonium, we know more than the MOD knows, which is pretty frightening.
What we didn't mention, just a little detail, just to show that you are correct there. Because of national security, at the time, the missing weapon-grade plutonium, nobody knew how much was missing, and you actually forecast how much was missing and was proven to be correct, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. But the MOD, I mean, obviously that's another cover-up saying that we don't know where it's from.
Yeah.
As I like to say, I don't know many supermarkets that stock weapons-grade plutonium. So there's only one possible place it could have come from in the UK.
Bethan talks about open democracy. Don't make me laugh. I would agree with you, Bethan. I think one of the things we need in Wales is a democratic revolution. We need to re-establish our democracy in Wales, because it's not a question of us losing it. We've lost it. We have lost it, and we have to re-establish that. Dawn talks about some very strange cancers in Llantwit Major during the 80s with children. I've heard that before. Llantwit Major's on the coast. Professor,
can I just come in there again, please? Yeah, that's a very, very good point, because we showed that there was, around Hinkley Point itself, there was a leukemia cluster which started in 1969. That date I was saying when the accident occurred. So yeah, there's been a lot of evidence of the connection that the industry is obviously tries to cover up.
Yeah, Kath is asking where is this and where is your information from? So just to reiterate, Kath, it's report NRPB M173. It's a Westminster report. It's their data. Leon comments that Cardiff is the 6th most threatened city in the world of sea level rises. Interesting point there.
What we know for absolute certainty is that particles of less than 5 microns will get out and will get out of the cooling ponds through the filters and into the mud.
I think what we've uncovered this evening with new information is a scandal. I'd like to thank Professor Barnham for his research, his diligence, and standing up to do the right thing, Professor. I mean, so many. I've spoken to scientists who still work in the industry and are unable to speak out, and they've told me that from as far back as 2018, when I was speaking to certain individuals, that we were right then, and we're certainly right now. I think the graph with the Westminster report with no corresponding spike in gamma completely blows out the water what natural resources Wales have been saying for 3 years. They said you'd only get an alpha spike, plutonium spike, if there were a gamma spike at the same time. So I think, Professor, we'll call it to a halt there this evening. Thank you so much for your research, and I'm sure we'll be talking again at sometime in the future. John says he swam in Barry many times in the channel. I think we'll think twice about it now. Elvid asks for a demonstration when the secret panel is meeting. That's a good idea. Richard says he doesn't want nuclear power on our doorstep. Yestin says that alarm bells were ringing in 2018. Tonight's session helps me to understand the dangers far better. And he thanks you, Professor Barnham, and me. Denver's asking for media coverage. Our Tunala charters. Do any of the politicians for this project live in the coastal community of Cardiff? Amazingly, yes, they do. Yes, they do. Dane is strongly against the dumping in Wales. Bethan, are there any other Senedd members at all who support you on this, Neil? If there's a vote, Bethan, I think everyone will support me and this campaign, except the Labour members and the Lib Dem and the Independents. Mark, thanks you, Professor. Nia says whether there's plutonium or not, it's still ridiculous to dump such an amount of mud in our waters. Dawn rightly points out that the tides will carry this all along the coast, and the Gulf Stream will push it up towards North Wales as well. Steve, it's not the Welsh Assembly, mate, it's the Welsh Government. Gareth thanks us. Steve says this place is like a ticking time bomb. Yeston says, thanks, guys, let's fight this. Dawn says, keep the fight up. Denver's against dumping anywhere. And Mark just points out that the Bristol Channel is supposed to have one of the fastest, strongest tides in the world. Dane again talks about alternatives to safely dispose of this waste. I think the issue is it shouldn't be dug up. What is there needs to be left. What is really important now is that we take this information, we use it, we share it on our Facebooks, we tweet, we write to MSs, we write to an MPs, we write to the newspaper, we phone up the BBC, we phone up ITV Wales and ask them why they're not covering this. We need to make as much noise as possible and get in touch with the campaign group. The details are on the page. I'll put them at the top of the page anyway. And let's stop this dumping because we have time. Okay? Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks. Thank you.